I'm Nima Rajan. A report by the Canadian Press of federal parties' financing at the grassroots level shows the riding-based war chests of Conservative candidates are well ahead of their political rivals. A review of the most recent financial statements filed by riding associations to Elections Canada show that Conservative associations have, on average, just under $61,000 in net assets. This is almost $25,000 more than the governing Liberals had on average at the end of 2020. Only 143 Liberal associations had filed the 2020 statements by this month to be counted, compared to 251 Conservative associations. The Canadian Press has obtained the RCMP's 4-volume, 538-page dossier on a group called the Committee for an Independent Canada. The previously secret records reveal Canada's spy service tracked the committee's rise during the 1960s and 70s, watching for signs of communist infiltration. Many political and cultural leaders of the day belonged to the committee, which wanted greater Canadian control of the industrial, media, and foreign policy spheres in an era of American dominance. 3 levels of government have announced millions of dollars for improvements to the sewage treatment plant that handles 70% of Winnipeg's wastewater. The first phase of work at the North End sewage treatment plant includes new raw sewage pumps, plate screens, and other improvements aimed at improving the health of Lake Winnipeg. The federal government is investing more than $116 million in the project. The city is contributing a further $143 million, while the province is chipping in $96 million. The Alberta government says the parents of another 12,000 children will be eligible for childcare subsidies under a renewed funding agreement with the federal government. The province is raising the cap for families eligible for childcare supports to a combined income of $90,000 from the previous ceiling of $75,000. It also is providing up to $125 a month for eligible families of children in licensed preschools. Alberta will also spend $4 million out of the $230 million it's getting under the deal with Ottawa on wage top-ups for early childhood educators. The chief of the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary says allegations of sexual assault against certain officers have shaken the force and the community. St. John lawyer Lynn Moore said she's heard from 9 women who have made allegations against 7 officers. She added calls and messages from women were still coming in, and the numbers continue to rise. Ms. Moore says 6 of the officers have since retired from the force. Chief Joe Boland says no formal complaints have been filed yet. The Alberta government is being urged to create an emergency program similar to the ones in other provinces to address a toxic drug supply that is killing people. Shazma Mitani, an emergency room doctor at Edmonton's Royal Alexandra Hospital, says she has seen people dying from drug poisoning on every one of her shifts during the pandemic. And Elaine Haischka with the University of Alberta's School of Public Health says COVID-19 border closures have forced dealers to cut or adulterate drugs to ensure a consistent supply, which may be upping the potency. An oil company working in Newfoundland and Labrador's offshore area says it has stumbled upon a shipwreck. Equinor Canada says an autonomous underwater vehicle used by its survey contractor found the wreck on July 13th. The disintegrating structure is in the Flemish Pass Basin, about 500 kilometers off the coast of St. John's, in about 1,200 meters of water. Equinor says it has shared information with the province and the Canadian Coast Guard, but so far the ship remains unidentified. The Nature Conservancy of Canada says it has acquired over 28 hectares of land on the mouth of PEI's Percival River. The peninsula-shaped property extends into Percival Bay and includes a freshwater wetland, salt marsh, forest, and 2.5 kilometers of beach shoreline. The largest unbroken area of salt marsh on the island is located along the Percival River. It features a mixed forest and a variety of birds and waterfowl. Organizers of an annual indoor rodeo in southwestern Manitoba say the event won't be going ahead next month. The Verdun Indoor Rodeo and Wild West Days governing body says the current COVID-19 public health restrictions and vaccine rollout plan would not allow them to host a successful event. Rodeo Weekend has been a signature event in the community for 31 years. And the Vancouver Aquarium held a job fair last week as it looks to fill 100 positions in preparing for reopening after closing for nearly a year due to the pandemic. A spokesperson says 94 job offers were extended over the weekend, with applications for a number of positions still being accepted. The 64-year-old aquarium laid off more than 200 full-time, part-time, and casual workers when it shut down last September after a steep decline in ticket sales. Officials say they hope it will be reopened before Labor Day. All right, up next, we'll have an interview with Renaud Brossard of CTF. Stay tuned. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation says Ottawa's bailout of the Muskrat Falls project in Newfoundland and Labrador should prompt a reckoning over the province's poor finances. The advocacy group says the province has the highest per-person program spending among provinces. This comes after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said Ottawa will spend $5.2 billion to bail out the over-budget Muskrat Falls hydroelectric project. The CTF says Ottawa's decision means all Canadian taxpayers are now responsible for, quote, the bad decisions made by big-spending politicians in Newfoundland and Labrador. It says the province must find savings so a second or third bailout doesn't become necessary. Well, joining us now to tell us more is Mr. Renaud Brossard, Atlantic Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Well, thanks for having me.
So let's start with a quick background of the Muskrat Falls project and why it ended up nearly doubling its estimated costs.
So the Muskrat Falls project was a project to dam the lower Chilchill River. It was supposed to cost $6.2 billion initially. For a little bit of perspective, that's about $12,000 for every single man, woman, and child living in Newfoundland and Labrador. But as government projects tend to do, the cost has ballooned up because of a poor oversight and some issues with planning to $13 billion roughly. And that's about $25,000 for every man, woman, and child living in Labrador.
And CTF is now criticizing Newfoundland and Labrador's per-person program spending. So how does all of this compare to other provinces?
Well, Newfoundland and Labrador has the highest per-person spending in the country, and by a significant margin. The province currently spends about $14,000 per person per year. To put it into perspective, Ontario spends about $10,000, or if you want to have some provinces with similar population density, Manitoba spends about $12,000, and Saskatchewan $12,500. So there's a significant difference in how much Newfoundland and Labrador spends versus the other provinces. And when the government of Newfoundland and Labrador mandated some private sector people to look into its finances, what they found is that it could save $1.2 billion a year, or about 10% of its budget, if it had a spending level that's similar to the rest of Canadian provinces.
So how is this Muskrat Falls bailout structured, and how does all of this impact Canadian taxpayers, sir?
Well, let's be very clear. Muskrat Falls might be the vehicle that the government is using, that the federal government is using, but this is very much a bailout of the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. So there's $2 billion that's going right now to bail out the hydro project, whether it is a dam itself or the transmission line to get to Newfoundland from Labrador. And there's another $3.2 billion over the next 26 years that the federal government is going to give. $3.2 billion in total over 26 years of the annual payments to help offset the rate increases from the Muskrat Falls project.
Now, the CTF is also saying that this government bailout should lead to change in the province when it comes to spending. So what kind of steps should the province take to reduce their spending, sir?
Well, of course, it should lead to change because what the government is doing right now is it's kind of sending a buoy to stop Newfoundland and Labrador from drowning in debt. That being said, if this doesn't come with spending cuts, we'll have to send another bailout a couple of years from now, and then a third bailout and a fourth bailout. So we want to avoid that. Earlier this year, the government of Newfoundland and Labrador published a report from this economic recovery team that pointed out these issues with spending, this $1.2 billion extra that it spends compared to other provinces. And what it suggested in there, which we think is very sensible, is to reduce the number of bureaucrats, to freeze the salaries of bureaucrats for a certain number of years, and of course to look for efficiencies within government in order to reduce the total costs of government and make sure it's sustainable.
So what's at risk here, sir, if the province continues on this path? I know you mentioned there's future bailouts that have potential as well. What would that look like for Canadian taxpayers if Newfoundland and Labrador keeps heading this way?
Well, there's two things that are at risk. First of all, for Newfoundland and Labrador, if the government cannot balance its budget, if it is not sustainable, it'll just keep going deeper and deeper into debt, which means that it'll spend a larger share of its revenues only to cover interest payments on its debt, as opposed to giving services to its citizens or putting a little bit of money back in their pockets through tax cuts. But the other thing this means for Canadian taxpayers is that, well, Newfoundland and Labrador is not the only province that's watching this. There's a lot of other premiers that are watching this. There's a lot of other boondoggles in every other province. I'm thinking of the Ontario Green Energy Act, for instance, where premiers would like to get their hands on federal money. And once that signal is sent, I can tell you there's going to be a bunch of premiers lining up to get their hands on more taxpayers' money from Ottawa, and it's going to be very costly for us as a taxpayer. Because after all, whether it is federal, provincial, or municipal, we're the ones who are stuck paying.
All right, sir, we'll definitely have to keep an eye on this situation, but thank you again for joining us on Forum Daily, sir. Stay tuned, everyone. We've got more stories from across Canada coming up after the break. Ontario's top doctor is encouraging kids to get vaccinated before school starts. And two Canadian women authors are in the running for the prestigious Booker Prize. Stay tuned. A person seeking access to a week's worth of emails and messages from the head of a federal agency embroiled in controversy has been told to wait 5 years or more for a response. The applicant recently asked the Public Health Agency of Canada for emails, texts, and messages that President Ian Stewart had sent or received from June 14th to the 21st. The access to information request was prompted by curiosity about Mr. Stewart's refusal to provide a House of Commons committee with unredacted documents about the firing of two scientists. Ontario's top doctor is urging parents to get their eligible children vaccinated as time runs out to have them fully immunized by Labor Day. Dr. Kieran Moore says students aged 12 to 17 who don't have 2 doses will face stricter isolation rules if there is an outbreak this fall. Public health measures are still being finalized for Ontario's back-to-school plan. WestJet is expanding its code-share agreement with KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. The deal builds on its new non-stop service between Calgary and Amsterdam. This type of agreement lets airlines sell tickets to places they usually don't fly to on flights operated by a partner airline. They let airlines increase their market presence and make it more convenient for travelers to fly with them. In this case, Calgary-based WestJet can market flights operated by KLM, and passengers will be able to easily transfer through Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport to 18 European cities. An animal rescue group is trying to save the population of white-tailed deer that has outgrown a Montreal area park. But the head of a veterinary ethics committee says doing anything other than euthanizing the animals is unrealistic. Sauvetage Animal Rescue Director Eric Dussault says the city of Longueuil on Montreal's South Shore has rejected every solution his organization has offered. There are now 70 deer in the park, which is a number Mr. Dussault says is several times what the urban green space can support. A third-generation farmer who lost much of his cherry crop during British Columbia's recent record-setting heat wave says he wants to remain passionate about the family business, but the realities of climate change are really taking a toll on him. Pravin Dhaliwal says cherries were cooked on the trees and 40% of the apples at his farm in the Okanagan community of Oliver were sunburned in the scorching temperatures that hit 41.5 degrees. He believes the impact of current weather conditions should qualify as a disaster, so farmers everywhere get the government support they need. A Saskatoon-born woman is in the running for one of the world's top literary prizes. Rachel Cusk, who now lives in London, has been selected for the Booker Prize longlist for her novel, A Second Place. She is one of 2 Canadians on the list. Mary Lawson, who grew up in Ontario, earned her second Booker nomination for her tale of life in a northern town, a town called Solace. The 2 are among 13 authors up for the prestigious prize, worth almost $90,000. Disney says it will close almost all of its Canadian stores as it shifts focus to e-commerce. The Walt Disney Company says it expects to shutter at least 60 stores across North America. The Disney Store, which sells Disney-themed toys, costumes, and other items, currently has 16 locations in Canada listed on its website, some of which are already listed as closed. Stephanie Young, Disney's president of consumer products, games, and publishing, says the COVID-19 pandemic has changed what consumers expect from the retailers. Postponed for an entire year because of COVID-19, Toronto's huge Marvel Avengers exhibition finally opened at Yorkdale Mall last week. The 25,000 square foot immersive exhibit aims to train fans how to be a station member and displays special memorabilia like Iron Man's Hall of Armor, Bruce Banner's lab, Captain America's personnel file, and will allow you to experience Wakanda from Black Panther. The exhibit has timed ticket entries, providing adequate space for social distancing, and has mandated mask wearing in the exhibit. Fashion trends have come full circle, and the outfits that you wore in the 70s and 80s might just be what your child is wearing today. A recent survey of 1,000 teens conducted by one poll found that 63% of kids not only love retro fashion, but look to their parents' old outfits for inspiration. Nearly 6 in 10 children admit to stealing one of their parents' old outfits to wear to school as well. This back-to-school season, retro styles and vintage finds are in, having parents feeling nostalgic yet excited to relive their golden years through the outfits of their children. Some U.S. parents say they're planning to continue homeschool their children even as schools resume in-person classes. The common denominator is that they have tried homeschooling on what they thought was a temporary basis and found it beneficial to their children. The U.S. Census Bureau has confirmed the surge. It says the rate of household homeschooling their children rose 11% by September 2020, doubling from 5.4% 6 months earlier. All right, don't go away. We've got our international segment coming up after the break with top news from around the world. We'll be right back. Stay with us right here on the Forum Daily. We'll be back after some short messages from our sponsors. Stay tuned. The Biden administration has indicated it has no plans to reopen international borders anytime soon. This as the U.S. battles surging COVID-19 cases among unvaccinated Americans. The decision comes after the U.S. recently extended a separate travel ban at its land borders with Canada and Mexico. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention say the Delta variant makes up for 83% of all new COVID-19 cases in the country, the vast majority of which are among the unvaccinated. The Department of Veterans Affairs has become the first major federal agency to require healthcare workers to get COVID-19 vaccines. The decision comes as the aggressive Delta variant spreads, and some communities report troubling increases in hospitalizations among unvaccinated people. At the VA, vaccines will now be mandatory for certain medical personnel, including physicians, dentists, podiatrists, optometrists, registered nurses, physician assistants, and others who work in departmental facilities or provide direct care to veterans. America's top infectious disease expert says the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is considering revising guidelines to recommend that even fully vaccinated people wear masks in public. Dr. Anthony Fauci says some areas where COVID-19 infection rates are surging, they are already urging people to do so, regardless of their vaccination status. He says those local rules are not compatible with the CDC's current recommendation that anyone who is fully vaccinated doesn't need to wear masks in public. Well, meanwhile, as most of the U.S. struggles with rising COVID-19 numbers among unvaccinated people, more nightclubs and bars in California's Bay Area are requiring proof of vaccination for entry. At Oasis Cabaret and Nightclub, the policy has been in effect since early July, when COVID-19 cases started rising again. Owner Darcy Drolinger says it's important to stay safe, and once the Delta variant started becoming more prevalent, they made the move. The San Francisco Bar Owner Alliance is now considering an industry-wide recommendation to demand proof of COVID-19 vaccination. The UN says in a new report that more women and children were killed and wounded in Afghanistan in the first half of 2021 than in any year since the United Nations began keeping count in 2009. The report says war-torn Afghanistan saw a 47% increase in the number of all civilians killed and wounded in violence across the country in the first 6 months of this year, compared to the same period a year earlier. It comes as the Taliban have swiftly captured territory in recent weeks, seized strategic border crossings, and threatened a number of provincial capitals as the U.S. nears completion of its withdrawal from Afghanistan. A British parliamentary report has found 64% of female veterans and 58% of women serving in the British Armed Forces have experienced bullying, harassment, or discrimination. The Defense Committee report says women who reported serious sexual offenses are denied justice by an inadequate military court system and complaints process. MPs heard accounts of women who were gang raped, bullied for refusing sexual advances, and assaulted by senior officers. The UN is going with a hybrid model for this September's General Assembly. It is giving 193 world leaders the option of attending the meeting in person or delivering a pre-recorded speech if COVID-19 restrictions prevent them from traveling. There has been growing pressure from some countries whose leaders want to come to New York to have an in-person meeting. But presidents, prime ministers, and monarchs travel with large delegations, which became an issue in terms of the number of people allowed into UN headquarters. Pope Francis says the existence of hunger in a world which can produce enough food for all is criminal. At a summit on food security in Rome last week, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres earlier warned that climate change and conflict are both consequences and drivers of poverty, income inequality, and the high cost of food. Mr. Guterres said in his video message that the same system is responsible for as much as 80% of biodiversity loss. Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga has decided to grant official medical benefits to 84 Hiroshima residents who were exposed to highly radioactive black rain after the city's atomic bombing. Mr. Suga's decision ends a long legal battle by the central government that delayed medical aid for the black rain victims who were outside a government-set boundary used to decide survivors' eligibility for medical care. The U.S. dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, killing 140,000 people. A second atomic bomb on Nagasaki 3 days later killed another 74,000 before Japan surrendered on August 15th. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also watch all our interviews on the News Forum YouTube channel. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.